Let me show you something that will probably make you uncomfortable. I know a man who did everything right. Good job, 6 figures, gym 4 times a week, bought her flowers on random Tuesdays just because, listened when she talked, remembered anniversaries, birthdays, the name of her childhood dog. This man was, by every conventional measure, the perfect boyfriend. And you know what happened? She left him for a guy who worked at a vape shop and lived with 2 roommates. When he told me this story, he kept repeating the same question. How? How is that possible? I gave her everything, and that right there is exactly the problem. He gave her everything except the one thing that actually matters. He never learned how to move her emotionally. He thought love was a transaction. Input kindness, receive loyalty. Input gifts, receive attraction. But emotions don't work like accounting software. And the men who don't understand this will keep losing women to guys who objectively have less, but know something they don't. Here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. When I say control a woman's emotions, I'm not talking about manipulation. I'm not talking about tricks or techniques or some pickup artist nonsense where you memorize scripts and hope she doesn't notice you're performing. What I'm talking about is influence, emotional leadership, the ability to set the tone of your relationship, to guide the emotional atmosphere, to be the stable center while everything else spins around you. This is what women actually respond to. Not your car, not your muscles, not how many compliments you give her per day. They respond to how you make them feel. And making someone feel something requires understanding how feelings actually work. Let me give you a number that will wake you up. Based on my years of consulting, I estimate that maybe 10% of men genuinely understand emotional dynamics in relationships. The other 90% are reacting blindly. They do something, she responds negatively, and they have no idea why. They do something else, she responds positively, and they have no idea why that worked either. They're stumbling through relationships like a blindfolded man in a minefield, occasionally stepping on something that explodes and never understanding what just happened. The men who understand emotional dynamics, they almost never get cheated on. They almost never get blindsided by breakups. They see problems coming months in advance because they can read the emotional weather, and when issues arise, they know how to navigate them without capsizing the entire relationship. Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is probably the most important concept I'll share today. The exact same action can produce completely opposite reactions depending on context. Let me say that again, because most men never grasp this. The same gesture, the same words, the same behavior can make her fall deeper in love with you or make her lose respect for you entirely. It depends on the emotional context in which it happens. Example, you text her good morning every single day. In month 1 of the relationship, this is sweet. She screenshots it and sends it to her friends. By month 8, if you've been too available, too predictable, too eager, that same good morning text makes her roll her eyes. It's not the action that changed, it's the emotional weight behind it. When you're scarce, your attention is valuable. When you're omnipresent, your attention is wallpaper. Nobody notices wallpaper. This is why the generic advice fails. Just be nice to her. Buy her flowers. Tell her she's beautiful. None of this is wrong exactly, but it's incomplete to the point of being useless. A man she's deeply attracted to can hand her a gas station rose and she'll press it in a book and keep it for years. A man she's lost attraction for can hand her a $1,000 bouquet and she'll think about how to politely accept it without giving him the wrong idea. Context is everything. The gesture is almost nothing. So how do you create the right context? It starts with something most men completely ignore: yourself. Before you can influence anyone else's emotions, you have to be able to regulate your own. This sounds obvious, but watch how most men behave in relationships. She doesn't text back for 3 hours and he spirals. She mentions a male co-worker and his stomach drops. She seems distant one evening, and he immediately starts interrogating her about what's wrong. This kind of emotional reactivity is repulsive to women on a primal level. And I don't mean repulsive in a cruel way, I mean it triggers something deep in her brain that says this person cannot protect me because he cannot even protect himself from his own feelings. The man who gets jealous easily, who panics when she pulls back slightly, who becomes needy when things get uncertain, he's broadcasting weakness through every pore, and women can smell it. They don't always know consciously what's turning them off, but their instincts know. Emotional self-control is the foundation. Without it, nothing else I tell you will work. You can learn every technique in the world, But if you're operating from a place of fear and neediness, she'll sense it underneath whatever you're doing. It's like putting expensive cologne on a body that hasn't showered in a week. The underlying reality leaks through. The men who have genuine emotional influence are the men who have done the work on themselves first. They've faced their fears. They've built a life that doesn't depend on any one woman's approval. They've developed real confidence, not performed confidence. And this brings me to the next principle. Self-respect and independence increase your influence automatically. A man who has no options, who has built nothing for himself, who needs this particular woman to feel complete, he has almost zero emotional leverage. Why? Because she knows he has nowhere else to go. She knows that if she misbehaves, he'll tolerate it because he's terrified of being alone. That knowledge, whether conscious or unconscious, erodes her respect for him slowly. It's like negotiating for a job when you're unemployed and desperate versus negotiating when you already have 2 other offers. The dynamic is completely different. Your position determines your power. The man who is invested in himself, who has genuine options, who could walk away and rebuild his life without falling apart, this man carries a different energy. He doesn't have to say anything about it. He doesn't have to brag about other women or pretend to be busy. The reality of his position radiates from him, and that reality makes everything he does land differently. Let me explain something about emotions that most people never think about. Emotions are not objective. They're subjective interpretations of events filtered through current mental state. This is crucial. The same event can produce completely different emotional responses depending on where she's at mentally when it happens. Let's say you surprise her with a weekend trip. If she's in love with you, feeling secure, excited about the relationship, this is the most romantic thing ever. She tells everyone. She can't believe how thoughtful you are. Now imagine the exact same gesture when she's been feeling suffocated, when she's been questioning the relationship, when she's been feeling like she needs space. That same surprise trip now feels like pressure, like you're trying too hard, like you're not reading the room. The trip didn't change. Her emotional filter changed. And men who don't understand this keep making grand gestures at the wrong moments and wondering why they backfire. You have to read the room before you act. What does she need right now? Not what do you want to give her. What does the situation actually call for? Here's something that took me years to fully understand. Whoever controls the frame of the situation controls the emotional atmosphere. Let me explain what I mean by frame. The frame is the implicit context that determines what things mean. If you act like a particular situation is a big deal, it becomes a big deal. If you treat it like nothing, it often becomes nothing. The man who gets worked up about every little thing, who treats minor disagreements as crises, who brings heavy emotional energy to situations that don't require it, he's letting the situation control him instead of controlling the situation. The man who stays relaxed when things get tense, who can defuse pressure with his own calmness, who doesn't give power to things by overreacting to them, he becomes the stable center of his relationship. And women gravitate toward that stability, not because they want to be controlled, but because emotional leadership provides a sense of safety that most men can't offer. And when she doesn't feel in control of the situation, something interesting happens. Her emotional responses intensify. This is psychology, not manipulation. When everything is predictable, when she knows exactly what will happen next, emotions flatten. But when there's uncertainty, when she's not sure what you'll do or say, emotions spike. This is why the early stages of relationships feel so intense. Everything is unknown. She doesn't know how you feel, what you'll do, where this is going. That uncertainty creates emotional charge. The men who maintain some of that uncertainty, even in long-term relationships, who don't become completely predictable, who can still surprise her, they keep the emotional intensity alive. Now let me be very direct about something practical. Never hand over all your structural power. And by structural power I mean the tangible things. Money, assets, decision-making authority, living situations, career. The man who puts everything in her name, who becomes financially dependent on her decisions, who arranges his entire life around her preferences at the expense of his own position, he has handed over leverage that's very difficult to get back. This isn't about being controlling or stingy. It's about maintaining a position from which you can operate. If you're in a situation where leaving would destroy your entire life financially, she knows that. Even if she never consciously thinks about it, some part of her knows you're stuck. And that knowledge shifts the power dynamic in ways that corrode attraction over time. Keep your own financial foundation solid. Keep your own social circle intact. Keep your own sense of direction and purpose regardless of the relationship. This isn't preparation for failure. It's maintenance of the position that makes success possible. Here's a truth that men don't want to hear. Women make decisions based primarily on how they feel, not on what was promised. This isn't an insult. It's just how emotional beings operate, and we're all emotional beings. She might have said she'll love you forever. She might have meant it completely in the moment, but that promise was made from within a particular emotional state. If that emotional state changes, the promise feels distant, almost like it was made by a different person. This is why men get blindsided. They take verbal commitments as locked-in contracts. She said she loved me. She said she'd never leave, and they're shocked when she acts in contradiction to those words. But her words reflected how she felt at the time. If you haven't maintained the emotional conditions that created those feelings, the words become artifacts of a past state, not binding agreements about the future. This means your job is never done. You don't secure commitment once and then stop working. You have to keep the emotional fire burning. Let's talk about the power of surprise. This is an underutilized tool. When she knows exactly what to expect from you, her emotional responses become muted. But when you do something unexpected, positive or negative, the emotional response amplifies significantly. This is basic neuroscience. Predictable stimuli fade into background noise. Novel stimuli grab attention and trigger emotional processing. The man who becomes completely predictable, whose every move she can anticipate weeks in advance, he has become emotionally invisible to her. She takes him for granted not because she's evil, but because his predictability has made him disappear into the background of her life. Strategic unpredictability keeps you visible, not chaos, not inconsistency in your values or reliability, but occasional surprises, an unexpected date, a spontaneous trip, a random gift on a random Tuesday, changing your routine occasionally, doing something she didn't see coming. These things keep emotional engagement alive. Now here's where many men fail catastrophically. They react emotionally to provocation and hand her all the power. Let me be specific. She says something designed to make you jealous. She mentions an ex. She talks about some guy who is flirting with her. She does something that pokes at your insecurities. And if you react, if you show jealousy, anger, hurt, defensiveness, you've just confirmed several things to her. You're emotionally controllable. Your buttons are easy to push. You're operating from a position of insecurity. You're more invested than she is. Every time she can trigger you, she gains psychological advantage. Not because she's consciously playing chess, but because the dynamic reveals who has power over whom. The man who stays calm when provoked, who doesn't take the bait, who responds with amused indifference rather than emotional reactivity. He maintains his position. He shows that her little tests don't rattle him. And paradoxically, this makes him more attractive. Her respect for him increases because he demonstrated strength, precisely when strength was being tested. Let me introduce a concept that most men never use. Anticipation as emotional fuel. The feeling of looking forward to something is often more emotionally intense than the thing itself. Think about Christmas morning as a kid versus the afternoon when you've already opened everything. The anticipation is where the magic lives. You can use this. Instead of always delivering everything immediately, sometimes you hint, sometimes you build up. I have something planned for this weekend. You're going to love it. And then you don't tell her what it is. That gap between announcement and revelation fills with emotional energy. She's thinking about it, wondering, getting excited. By the time you actually do the thing, she's already emotionally invested. This works in small ways too. Remind me to tell you something later. I had a thought about us, but I want to wait for the right moment to share it. These little suspense loops keep emotional engagement high. Now let me explain a principle that governs much of relationship dynamics. Reward desired behavior with presence and warmth. Respond to undesired behavior with withdrawal and distance. This isn't punishment. It's not revenge. It's natural consequence. When she treats you well, when she respects you, when she adds value to your life, you naturally give her more of your time and attention. When she disrespects you, when she crosses boundaries, when she behaves in ways that no self-respecting man would tolerate, you pull back. Not dramatically, not with announcements or ultimatums. You just become less available, less warm, less engaged. Most men do the opposite. When she behaves badly, they chase harder, trying to fix it, trying to win her back, trying to convince her to treat them better. This rewards the bad behavior with increased attention. She learns unconsciously that mistreating you gets her more of you. The cycle continues. The man who pulls back when disrespected, calmly and without drama, teaches her something different. He teaches her that his presence is conditional on mutual respect, and that lesson, over time, shapes the relationship for the better. Here's a specific scenario that trips up almost every man who doesn't understand these dynamics. She threatens to leave. Maybe you had a fight. Maybe she's upset about something, and she says the words, "Maybe we should break up." Or, "I need to think about whether this is working." The average man panics. He immediately goes into damage control mode. "Please don't leave. I'll change. What do I need to do? Tell me, and I'll do it." This response, while emotionally understandable, is strategically disastrous. You've just shown her that the threat of leaving gives her total control over you. You've confirmed that you're more afraid of losing her than she is of losing you. That power imbalance will now haunt your relationship. Every future disagreement, she knows the nuclear button works. All she has to do is hint at leaving, and you'll fold. The correct response when someone threatens to leave is to hold the door open. Not with cruelty, not with spite, but with calm dignity. "I'd hate to see you go, but if that's what you feel you need to do, I understand." And then you let her sit with that. 9 times out of 10, she was testing. She wanted to see if you'd chase. She wanted to feel like she had that power. When you don't give her what she expected, something shifts. She has to reevaluate, and often she comes back with a completely different energy. This leads me to perhaps the most important principle of all. Your willingness to walk away is the foundation of your emotional power. If you cannot lose her, you cannot influence her. This sounds paradoxical, but it's true. The man who is terrified of being alone, who has built his entire sense of self around this relationship, who would fall apart if she left, he has no leverage. She can feel that desperation even if he never voices it. It weakens every position he takes, softens every boundary he tries to set, undermines every attempt at emotional leadership. But the man who loves her and wants the relationship but would ultimately be okay without it, who has a full life outside of her, who could rebuild and move on if necessary, he operates from a position of strength. He's choosing to be there, not clinging because he has no alternative. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about actually building a life robust enough that no single person's departure would destroy you. When you have that foundation, everything else becomes easier. Let me give you a specific case study to illustrate all of this. A man came to me with the following situation. He'd been dating a woman for about a year. Things were generally good. But she had started making demands about a female friend of his. Nothing inappropriate was happening. They'd been friends for years. But his girlfriend wanted him to cut off contact completely. No more hangouts, no more texts, nothing. The average man in this situation does one of 2 things. Either he complies immediately, hoping to keep the peace, essentially teaching her that jealousy tantrums get results, or he gets defensive and angry, starting a fight that escalates into something bigger. Both responses are wrong. Here's what the emotionally intelligent man does. First, he stays calm. Her demand is emotionally charged, but his response doesn't have to be. Second, he doesn't immediately comply, but he also doesn't dismiss her feelings. "I hear that you're uncomfortable. Help me understand what specifically is bothering you." This isn't interrogation, it's genuine curiosity. He wants to know what's actually going on beneath the demand. Often, the jealousy isn't really about the friend. It's about insecurity that could have a dozen other sources. Third, he makes clear what he's willing and not willing to do. "I'm not going to end a friendship that predates our relationship based on suspicion, but I'm happy to make sure you feel included. She can join us for dinner, you can meet her properly. If there's specific behavior that's bothering you, tell me and I'll consider it." He's setting a boundary without being combative. He's offering compromise without capitulating. Fourth, if she escalates, if she threatens, if she issues ultimatums, he does not chase. He calmly disengages. "It seems like you're really upset right now. Let's talk about this when we've both had time to think." And then he gives her space. He doesn't text her 6 times asking if she's okay. He doesn't show up with flowers trying to fix it. He lets the tension exist without rushing to resolve it. And fifth, Only when she comes back in a calmer state, ready to discuss things reasonably, does he re-engage fully. She learns that emotional explosions don't get rewarded. She learns that he has boundaries that don't bend under pressure. She learns that he's not afraid of temporary discomfort. And ironically, her respect for him increases. Her attraction intensifies. Because he demonstrated exactly the kind of emotional leadership that women crave but rarely experience. Everything I've shared today points toward one underlying truth. Emotional leadership is not a technique. It's an identity. It's not something you perform, it's something you become. The man who can truly guide the emotional dynamics of his relationship isn't following a script. He's operating from a place of genuine inner stability, real self-respect, actual options, and true willingness to walk away if necessary. You can't fake these things for long. Women are too perceptive. They'll sense the incongruence between what you're doing and what you actually are. The work, the real work, is becoming the kind of man for whom these behaviors are natural. Building a life that's genuinely full so your neediness evaporates. Developing real confidence through real achievement so your security isn't a performance. Processing your fears and insecurities so they don't leak out in reactive moments. This takes time, it takes effort, but it's the only path that leads to lasting change. Let me tell you what most men get wrong about all of this. They hear control her emotions and they think about tricks, techniques, lines to say, moves to make. They want the shortcut. But emotional influence doesn't work that way. It's not about what you do to her, it's about who you are in the relationship. A man who's genuinely confident doesn't have to try to seem confident. A man who genuinely has options doesn't have to pretend to have options. A man who genuinely wouldn't fall apart if she left doesn't have to act like he wouldn't fall apart. The behaviors flow naturally from the underlying reality. And women, operating on millions of years of evolved intuition, can tell the difference between the real thing and the performance. Your job is to become real, not to become a better actor. I've been doing this work for over a decade now. I've seen thousands of relationships. I've watched patterns repeat with almost mathematical precision. And I can tell you with certainty that the men who build the relationships they want are not the best looking. They're not the richest. They're not the smoothest talkers. They're the men who understand that relationships are emotional systems that respond to emotional inputs. They're the men who've done the internal work to become genuinely stable, genuinely valuable, genuinely capable of walking away. They're the men who treat emotional leadership as a skill to be developed over a lifetime, not a trick to be deployed when convenient. So what do you do now? You start with yourself. Get your own emotional house in order. Build a life that doesn't depend on any one person. Develop genuine confidence through genuine accomplishment. Learn to stay calm when others are reactive. Practice not chasing when someone pulls away. Build the willingness to walk away, not as a bluff, but as a real position you could actually take. And then, from that foundation, you engage with relationships differently. You're not trying to get her. You're choosing whether she fits into the life you're building. You're not reacting to her moods. You're setting the emotional tone for the relationship. You're not begging for respect. You're requiring it as a condition of your continued presence. For those of you who want to go deeper, who want the specific frameworks, the detailed techniques, the step-by-step guidance on building this kind of emotional foundation, I have material that goes far beyond what I can cover in a single video. It's available on my website, link is below every video. But even if you never look at any of that, what I've shared today can change how you operate in relationships if you actually apply it and not just nod along and then forget everything by tomorrow. I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time when you lost emotional control in a relationship and it cost you, or a time when you held your ground and everything changed. The more specific you are, the more everyone learns. This isn't theory for me. These are patterns I've witnessed hundreds of times. Your story might be exactly what another man needs to understand his own situation.